Hello, and welcome to Behind the Book, another of public programming's series presented to introduce you to some authors who are bringing us some very interesting material that's usually related to the sciences being taught at Caltech. We look forward to your joining us for future programs as well. But tonight, we're really excited to be presenting Roberta H. Martínez, who has written a book about Latinos in Pasadena. I want to start off, though, by thanking our sponsors, the Friends of Beckman Auditorium, whose support has been invaluable in helping us produce programs that are aimed at young people and to bring some of the exceptional artists that we've been able to bring either virtually during this past 2 years of pandemic or as well onto our stage in Beckman Auditorium when we go back live again. And another of our sponsors is the Caltech Federal Employees Credit Union. It has been incredibly important to us to have their support over the years, and we really appreciate all of the help that they have given us. For more information about how you too can become a friend of Beckman Auditorium, and there are benefits being associated with that Friends organization, including early notice about programs, early access to buying tickets, and sometimes preferential seating when we have open events again inside of Beckman Auditorium. And you can find out by going to events.caltech.edu. And you will find out about how to register to get our membership information, how to get our newsletter, and also you'll have access to our previous programs that are kept in an archive at that site. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's host. Raul Espinoza has been working in the arts for a long time, a couple of decades by now, and has played a very important role in audience development and community engagement. He introduced us to Roberta H. Martínez at an event that he coordinated for A Noise Within, another of Pasadena's performing arts treasures. And it is my pleasure now to welcome Raul, who will proceed with our evening's program.
Thank you, Michael. Before I continue, I want to address that Dr. Tashiana Bryant-Myrick was to facilitate this afternoon's event. Unfortunately, she had a family emergency, so we send her thoughts and prayers. I stepped in at the last minute, and I hope to do this program justice. So good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes, and welcome to the first Behind the Book event of 2022. So let's get this thing started. Our special guest was born in East LA and received her MA in music and her BA in music and her MA in music history from UC Riverside. She served as executive director of Latino Heritage and chair of the Arts Commission and Library Commission for the city of Pasadena. She sat on the boards of the Armory Center for the Arts, Pasadena Community Access Corporation, and the Pasadena Senior Center. In 2019, she was interviewed by C-SPAN on the history of Latinos in the San Gabriel Valley, and just this morning appeared on Good Day LA with Michaela Pereira. She is an actor, historian, writer. She is an expert on the history of the Latino community in Pasadena. Her book, Latinos in Pasadena, was published in 2009 by Arcadia Publishing. Por favor, help me welcome Roberta H. Martínez. Roberta.
Hello, Raul. How are you today?
I'm so excited to be here with you again. Listen, before we get started, let me just let me talk to our audience real quickly. You will notice that there is a Q&A box, so please post your questions there when we get to that segment. And also, you can raise your hand. There's a raise your hand icon at the bottom there. So let's get started, Roberta. Today's 7-minute appearance on Good Day LA was just not enough. So I would love for you to, let's just roll this out and give us a little presentation that you've got prepared for us.
Certainly. Well, and we'll cover as much as we can now too, because there's a lot of history and a lot of community to cover. If you wouldn't mind the first slide, please. So this image was one of the first images I saw when I started looking in the archives at the Pasadena Museum of History. I lived for 15 years in Pasadena and had no idea Latinos had ever been here because there weren't any markers, there weren't any things up that showed that history that was there. And this was noticed as a Mexican, a squatter's cabin up in the hills. And I decided I wanted to learn more about this community. And at about the same time, I was meeting some of the elders whose families had been here for 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, some of them. Next slide, please. But as we begin this talk, I want to first begin by acknowledging the people that were here before all of the rest of us came, no matter which other continent. And some folks refer to themselves as Gabrielinos, Kij, or Tongva. These are the first peoples who were here before all of the rest of us. And if you look at this wonderful map by Chester King User, you'll see how specific some of the different groups were, how they interacted with each other. People who lived in this area would go down following the water to the Pacific Ocean. And as I understand it, some then would also go across to Catalina. So the story of this land should begin with the first people who were here before all of the rest of us came. And then in the 1700s, here come the Spanish working for the next slide, for the crown and the cross. And among the things that are established in the area eventually is Misión San Gabriel Arcángel. This is a drawing by Michael J. Hart. And one of the things that we don't usually think about when we think about San Gabriel and Los Angeles, we tend to think about Los Angeles as being the hub, and everything else emanates, everything emanates from there in San Gabriel, Pasadena. All of the cities in what we now call the San Gabriel Valley is really secondary. But the San Gabriel Mission is actually where a lot of the energy, a lot of the commerce, a lot of the people coming into the area, that was where they started. And among the people, if you want to go to the next slide, please, is Eulalia Perez Guillén de Mariné, which is a mouthful. Eulalia Perez Guillén de Mariné, her dad was down in Baja in the port of Loreto, and she married at about 15, followed her husband, following up the trail from Baja to Alta California, which is what it was at that point yet, Nueva España. And she was in San Diego, in the very beginnings of San Diego. She was in San Juan Capistrano. And in 1812, there was a gigantic earthquake that took place. And it was so huge that if you go to the San Juan Capistrano, you'll see where it still is essentially demolished by that earthquake. She was in the church at that time. She was very devout. She was with her child. She was pregnant. And she ran out with her child as other people were kind of practically stampeding to get out of there. So she was around in 1812, San Diego, and then came back up to the San Gabriel mission following her son, who was a soldier. She and her daughters came up. She was at the mission, and she actually got her job as a cook by a 3-day chopped event. So there were 3 women that were possibly going to be the head cook at Mission San Gabriel, and each day one woman worked with the team of the Indians that were in the kitchen doing the work. And they had a contest, and she was the one. After 3 days, she won. And part of the reason she won was because one of the indigenous that was there, his name was Tomas, said that she was the easiest to work with. She stayed at the mission and began to have more and more responsibility until eventually she functioned as the chief operating officer, La Llavera, for all of the mission. And she oversaw the oil, and she oversaw the leather, and she oversaw who was going to be wearing which clothes. And when the lands were secularized, Rancho El Rincón de San Pascual was reserved for her. All of Pasadena and some of the other cities nearby, and the Arroyo over to the west side, and a mile into the foothills was all reserved for her. So yes, yeah, for her service. And at that point, she was a widow. Next slide, please. A little bit later, time passes, and we'll get back to Doña Eulalia in a minute. Manuel Garfias is the person that has a unique distinction of being the last Mexicano to own Rancho San Pascual and the first US citizen to own Rancho San Pascual because of the US-Mexican War. We have a war between the United States, los Estados Unidos, and los Estados Unidos de Mexico. And as a result of this, there is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and people that own land are supposed to be able to continue to own that land. And next slide, please. This is the plat of San Pascual Rancho. And you can see that, you can see there's more detail because you have more people and because also technology is advancing. So rather than having just a scribe doing something, you have something where you can imprint information. And whether before there were few enough people, you could say, okay, it's over to that oak tree and then down there by the spring and then over to the left. Now you're beginning to get more people in this area. And you can see on the left-hand side, the actual detailed information about where everything is. Next slide, please. It's about 14,000 acres. Doña Eulalia continues to be of interest because she's rather aged and because people know that she is a connection with the time before. But you'll see that this image, the stereograph image, has Senora Ulilala Perez Guillen at her adobe residence. Now we've begun to lose a little bit of the history. The stories that I was telling you earlier began to be lost because somebody who doesn't know her, somebody who doesn't speak Spanish is getting information secondhand, thirdhand. Next slide, please. And we eventually reach a point where here we have number 193, a specimen of longevity at the San Gabriel Mission. She now has become an icon. She's no longer the young woman who danced or sang or was in the earthquake or any of those experiences I shared with you. All of that begins to get lost. But she is a curiosity and is nearly sent to the World's Fair. Lucky Baldwin brings people out to see her because of who she is. And the reason I can tell you the stories I did, next slide, is because Bancroft sent out Thomas Savage, who essentially did an oral interview, an oral history with her.
I see.
And you can find this online. I mean, that's the exciting part. You can find this online in Spanish and in English. The translation has some issues with it. For example, they refer to gente de razón, and the translator writes this as being white because the translation is happening during the 1950s.
You know, it's interesting, Roberta. I'm looking at the writing on there and it says una vieja sus recuerdos, which is an old lady in her memories.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Sus recuerdos.
Y sus recuerdos. And I think that's one of those things when we think about how do we reconnect with history? How do we lose history if we don't have the people who have lived tell us what they experienced, even though it may not always be accurate? We lose that real touch about what is happening with history. Thank you. Moving on. Next slide, please. And in the meantime, Manuel Garfias is not interviewed. He had a fantastic house. It was down in the Arroyo. People are writing about it. Part of it was 2 stories, which was a big deal thing, and it had green shutters, which was also a really big deal thing. And it begins to just be destroyed by time. And you can see there it says Garfias Adobe. Garfias was once owner of all land about Pasadena, 1847. And so even the dates began to become a little squirrely as far as that goes. Thank you. Next slide, please. And there's a whole area of Latino heritage and history that hasn't been explored. And this is folks like Carlos R. Cruz, who is born in California, in Central California, and then comes into this area and he builds a home in Eaton Canyon. He's a homesteader. He has hundreds of acres, and people are not sure because there isn't any information that confirms that John Muir actually spoke with him. But some people believe that he may have been the person with whom John Muir met one night. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of my favorite slides, and we will come back to this fellow. Arturo Bandini went to the Tracy Spencer School of Acting. If you look down, people want to know what you're looking at, so they look at you. He's wearing the dark hat. He's at San Fernando Rey de España, Misión. His dad was Juan Bandini, who was the last Mexicano Secretary of State to Pío Pico, who was the last Mexicano governor of our state. He goes to St. Vincent's for high school, essentially, and then on to Santa Clara College, gets both his BA, MA, and plays the piccolo, among other things. He's there with his friends, and we'll come back to him. This is the teaser. So we'll come back to Arturo later, and there's a connection with Caltech.
Got you. I was just going to ask you, where is this, but we'll wait for.
It's in San Fernando. This is actually in San Fernando. And one of the things that's interesting is because things are changing here so quickly, the missions originally had the church and military supporting them. Once the lands were secularized, they weren't receiving money. So you had many of the missions becoming deteriorated. And this is part of what you're seeing here. Okay, next slide. Bringing us a little bit closer here to Pasadena. This is, most people think of it as Hastings Ranch. Originally, it was Mesa Alto Rancho. Colonel Hastings owned this ranch. And what I wanted to show here actually in this image is the diversity of the workers that are there from so many backgrounds. Many of them are migrants or immigrants from places like Germany, Italy, Greece, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Russia, Japan, China, Armenia, as well as what at that time was still a bit of the West, which we would now think of as the Midwest of the United States, as well as parts of Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean islands.
Wow, truly a melting pot, right?
Well, it was a place where people were gathering together. I'm not sure whether or not it was a melting pot, but it certainly was. That you can get into, was it a salad or a melting pot? And yes, it was. Do the improvisation. Yes, and
yes.
But I think it's important to remember the diversity of who was working out in the field, and to recognize the opportunities that people were taking. And also recognize that at places like Sunny Slope, which was another ranch in the area, there were charts that talked about different pay grades. If you were, at that point, they wouldn't necessarily call you white. But if you were Chinese, you got X amount of money. If you were, quote unquote, a Negro, you got X amount of money. If you were Mexican, you got so much money. And if you were Irish, you got so much money.
Wow.
So it was a different scale depending upon who you were. The first people who came to Pasadena weren't so, folks that were involved with the Indiana colony were more embracing of the diversity was here. Once you start getting into the 1880s, the 1890s, and into the beginning of the 20th century, then you have more division and placements taking, settling of where people should be. Next slide, please. And this is one of the things that's kind of unique about Pasadena and the Southwest. Because we're so close to Mexico, people would come as a family, where other groups would send maybe a family over. You would have the mother and the father and the grandpa and the tios, and then you had the religious compadres, the godfathers, the godmothers, people coming in. And there was a sewer farm in Pasadena. And part of what they did was desiccate what came from the sewers. And then instead of using fertilizer, as we're used to thinking about it, they would spread this powdered around, so that what happened, if anybody's seen the movie The Martian, is we produce wonderful things sometimes with what we're through with. And so here's a family. Yes, I'm trying to be somewhat discreet because it's the dinner hour for some. Right. So there's this family that's working there, and they're picking walnuts. So when we see, when we see some of the street names like Walnut or Orange Grove, that's because there was a period when that was what was going on in the area. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a mental marker for where the primarily Mexicanos were living, because that was the largest group of Latinos that were here. To the south, you see the more commercial area, the Barrio of Sonora, or South Side, or the commercial district. In the northwest of Pasadena, you see the Winona Cypress neighborhood that eventually becomes an established blue-collar community where there are African Americans, Mexican Americans, Japanese Americans, and after one talk, I was informed, and there were Irish Americans there too. And then over on the east side of town, you have sort of where the Ross is and where the complex that is near where Sears used to be. You have the area of Chihuahuita, which was alternately known as Chihuahuita, Little Mexico, or Tiddlyville. And that was a colonia. So that was an area that was more rural. And it's important for us to remember that back in the day, if you went out that far, the roads weren't necessarily paved. No. So for somebody from Chihuahuita, they would talk smack about the folks that were living in Sonora or the south side, because those were the people on the west side of town. And this brings us to the point of just the idea of push-pull migration, the idea that you can settle on where neighborhoods are, where communities of people live at various times. And then there are elements that will push people out. Maybe they raise the rent, maybe they raise the cost of houses, and you can pull people in. Maybe there's a church that you go to, you're of a particular denomination and you want to be close to your church, or there's a store that has chile powder, in this case, that you're really looking for. Or when I was a kid, you would have had saladitos. I wouldn't give it anything. I would have moved where there were saladitos. And you also have, intersecting with that, the impact of redlining and restrictive covenants. So you have all of these elements helping to define where people are going to be living. And it's important to remember when you're looking at this, that often with these communities, you may have had a large area that was predominantly Mexicano or Cuban, or later on Panamanian or Salvadoreño. But there is intersections that are taking place with people that have similar jobs and similar needs. So if a whole bunch of people that are Black or Asian or Latino or white need to get on a bus, and you have a choice of either living in a house, renting a house that has a bus stop, or one that doesn't, you're going to be by that bus stop. Next, please. Next slide. And part of what's going on here is we're beginning to see these different experiences that are going on. I love saying these old-fashioned names. Maria Guadalupe Angelina Lopez de Lauther. She's a graduate from Pasadena High School in 1897. And if you go to San Gabriel, city of San Gabriel, and you look at the business district that's there, she contributed to making sure that it was developed in a way that had a connection with a mission. And there is a low house that you probably drive by that is the Casa Lopez de Lauther. And that was where she lived. And that was where she kept the cultura. She was a translator of what she had grown up with, both in San Gabriel and in Pasadena. And then you have the change that's happening in the 20s here. You have Amelia Hernandez and friends from the Guerrero collection. And this is from two women that I happen to know whose last names are Guerrero, who have all of these pictures that are part of Pasadena history. And what's interesting to look at, in contrast with the Mesa wedding, is Mesa wedding is very much more traditional, very demure. You can see, you know, our tatarabuelos or abuelos might have worn something like this. And these young women, these four young women, they're breaking turf here because they probably, you could see their knees. I mean, they're when they sat down, you could see their knees. Their hair is cut short and it's got a twirl because they're flappers. They're enjoying what a flapper could be. Next slide. And among the things that happen with a bit of this segregation and division was a real effort in what was called social gospel movement. And these were people who wanted to help those, we might think about it as a variation on liberation theology. So they want to help people get stronger financially, economically. And one of the ways they're going to do that, and this was on near Broadway, near Arroyo Parkway, almost at the end of the 110, was this cooperative laundry. So the women would stay with their domestic arts, but they would be gathered together in this large laundry, working, using women's skills, and then being able to take that money back to their families. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of taking a peek at some of what's going on with the people that are living in the neighborhood in these times. These are the teens and the 20s and some of them into the 30s. And these guys, they look like they're trying to be toughs. Whether or not they really are, I don't know. I don't know if I really buy it, except for the one fellow who's kind of up front with his hat going back like this. If he wanted to walk in the middle of the street, I would move over. I wouldn't ask twice. And then you have like this other picture of the Mesa family at the Arroyo Seco. We forget that it does get wet. And I love this picture in part because if you look, there's all of the younger people are standing up out of the water. And there's the señora who is kind of seated with her hand covering her face a little bit. I love to seeing that this intergenerational sort of experience is taking place. Next slide. Also in the area of Sonora South Side is this picture from Georgia Torres, who has made First Communion. And on the back of this image, she's writing to her family that she has made her First Communion. She's very proud, she misses them, and she loves them. And I don't know whether or not she might have made her First Communion at Our Lady of Guadalupe Mission Church. There were two quote unquote Mexican churches that were in Pasadena. One of them was on Raymond, and the other was in Chihuahuita, and it was known as San Juan Bautista. It no longer exists. And one of the things that's fun about that one was because it was near Chihuahuita, not only were the Catholics there, so were the Methodists. And so there was the Methodists on this side and the Catholics on this other side. And the Catholics would go over to the Methodists for hot chocolate on Wednesdays. And the Methodists would come over to the Jamaica when they had them for the church fundraisers. And there was a lot of going back and forth. And the reason I know this is because elders shared their stories with me. Next slide, please. There were also schools that people were attending. And unfortunately, in Pasadena, there were two schools that were established as segregated schools. This was not just the push-pull migration. This was not just restrictive covenants or redlining that happened, especially after the 40s through the 60s and the 70s. This was a school that was established to separate the Mexicans from the rest of the school district. South Raymond School was there from 1914 to 1916, later on became known as Junipero Serra. And when I talked with an elder about Junipero Serra, among the things that had taken place was they tried to get rid of Spanish pretty much as a language. And so they were really focused on Americanizing the students and not necessarily having them become bilingual. And so this elder, I said, you went to Junipero Serra? And he looked at me and said, excuse me? And I said, Junipero Serra. And he paused and he said, Junipero Serra. It was that strong. This was also at a time when if you spoke Spanish at school, at some schools, children would be slapped for speaking Spanish in the classroom, on the playground. And there were some that would have things put across their mouth, so they would be reminded to not speak Spanish.
Roberta, let me ask you a question about this. Who actually initiated the creation of these separate schools?
The school board.
The school board themselves said, we want to make sure that the Mexicans don't mix with us and we're going to create these schools.
They wanted to have a separate place for them. This is also was some part of what happened. I mentioned the social gospel kind of movement, and these folks, especially women who were very involved with that, who they've been talking about the dirty the board members. I think they were called board of directors at that point for the city of Pasadena. Were talking about how dirty the Mexicans were, this, that, and the other. And these good social gospel women came in and said, well, why is that? Where are their sewers? And literally in the paper, you find the quote, oops, we forgot to include the sewers. So there were some people that were here that were lovely, but there were also people here that wanted to have separation of people that they perceived as being different or lesser than. The Gallegos family, these social gospel folks that had a real passion for social gospel, among the things they started was what we can now think of as affordable housing. The Broadway courts were on, again, that same little area after you get off the 110. That's the general area where the Broadway courts were. And it was affordable housing that was made for Mexicanos. Next slide, please. This is the other Mexican school that was set up, and it was Titleyville School for 1915, 1916, Chihuahuita School, 1916 to 1923, and then the Fremont Elementary School. And you can see all of the niños that are there with their Christmas gifties. It's 1929, and this is from Manuel Contreras, Manny Contreras's collection. Manny was one of those folks who was involved with the Mexican settlement that was also over in that commercial section we looked at before. And he was among those that started the Pasadena Mexican American History Association, which is how I got to meet some of these elders.
Oh, gotcha.
Next slide, please. So at Junipero Serra, we have these young women, these young girls that are, as part of their curriculum, learning how to cook, because they would become in many people's mind, that was going to be their option. They were going to be using their arms and their hearts, right? And so having that extra bit of math or science or anything like that was not going to be included in their school day-to-day curriculum. This is 1928. The school keeps growing in population up until about 1929, 1930. And then in 1931, they close it. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that this takes place with the same times that the deportations are taking place within the Southwest and other parts of the United States. And people will argue whether it was 1 million or 2 million people that were sent to Mexico from the United States. And of that, there was 60% that were American citizens that were sent to Mexico. They were sent to a land they did not know. They, given what I was sharing a little bit earlier, they did not speak the language. The young women who were flappers, who were being a little risque here, going to some little, pueblito, are going to be looked on as maybe girls that are vagabundas, that are walking the streets. And, once your reputation is gone, it's a rough thing to get back. They also had, at Junipero Serra, the what they called jarabe, and what we would refer to now as folklorico. And that's what those young folks are there with, the girls with their long skirts. And the young man there, his name is Jose Medina, and he's dressed as a 49er. And here's where we come back to how history gets lost. I doubt that he knew anything about Arturo Bandini. I doubt that he knew anything about Eulalia Perez de Guillen. I doubt that he knew anything about Manuel Garfias, who are intimate parts of this history of Pasadena, let alone the cover that people have been seeing on the book. Abelemio Hernandez and his wife Rita sold tamales, and their store during 1910 was on Colorado Boulevard. He probably didn't know that, because we're talking 1928 or 1926, and that's a million years away to somebody who's maybe 11 or 12. Next slide, please. Did you have a question?
I do. I saw somebody posting a question just now, and here's the question. The question is, I'm interested if there is any information about Puerto Ricans in California. Or
there is some, but in this area, I know many of the people from the Caribe are not included often in what's going on. There are Puerto Ricans, actually, to tell you, it gets out of order with the slide, but just to pop into that, among the people in the late, 70s, I believe, one of the things that Pasadena did was to have the very first Spanish language classes that were taking place via television. That started in Pasadena. And I'm not remembering the woman's first name. Her last name was Lightfoot, y era puertorriqueña. So she was very, very much here and very much present. But that's a whole, 2 or 3 generations later. There are folks that are also here, those several generations later, that are from Panama, or as I mentioned, from El Salvador. There's a large group of people following the war. There's a large group of people rather, who come from these countries, whose histories are included, well, not their histories, but are recognized in the book. And I think this is where having a book that has all of our backgrounds over 3 centuries is not enough. We need more.
Right. Let me, there's a couple more questions. I want to toss them out to you real quickly. One of which is, the question is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, this is being recorded. And those of you that registered, you will receive an email at the point where we put it on our website for you to go see, these behind the book talks. And then here's a comment that relates to the Puerto Ricans in California question, Roberta. It comes from Walter Dominguez.
Oh, yes, Walter.
Hi, Walter. Robert A. Dominguez moved to Pasadena after being discharged from the Army Hospital at Vista de Arroyo Hotel. He was born in Juncos, Puerto Rico.
There you go. There are histories that are one of the things, skipping ahead, but it's pertinent because you asked the question, is it would be wonderful to get more oral history so that we have greater diversity of who all has been here and when they were here. And the Ninth Circuit Court actually is a part of the story I'm going to start to tell now, which is very quickly. Now, the fellow who you still can't see because he's in the shadows is Arturo Bandini.
Ah,
there he is. But he has married Helen Elliott, who was the eldest daughter of T.B. and Helen Elliott, who are among those that started the California colony of Indiana. And so these are the people that are the Midwesterners. They're coming from Indiana, and they're the ones that are helping to start what we begin to know are more familiar with Pasadena proper. Now, one of the things is that, interestingly enough, although he was Catholic, they were married at her family home, which is where the Ninth Circuit Court is now.
aye.
So there is the connection to Walter's comment and some of the history that went on there. And because people that were living out here were still enjoying, there wasn't as much cement here at the turn of the century. You could still go out by the Los Angeles River and you'd have your elaborate tents. And there they are. And the son, I believe that's Ralph Elliott, is there with his bugle. So you can imagine walking around there and hearing the bugle all of a sudden breaking up part of what's going on there. So they marry, next slide, please. And they eventually have a home that's near Wilson and San Pascual. And what, you see, we're getting towards Caltech. We're going back, we're going there.
Great.
And there's his other friends and a furry friend who is digging a hole or going down a little ravine or something. You can see the tail there. And this photo is taken by Ralph Bandini. And eventually, Arturo and Helen Elliott Bandini decide that they're going to have a house. And so they contact these two brothers to design a house for them. And these are the Green brothers. Next slide, please. And so the Green brothers consider, and people there at the Gamble House refer to the house, the Bandini home, as the pivotal home for this transition and intersection of the exterior and the interior together. And if you look at the map, you can see the Bandini lot. And originally that street name was Bandini, not Michigan. The people that lived in the northern end of Michigan were able to push the name down, and the name Bandini was obliterated. The street below is San Pascual. And as you walk through the campus at Caltech, you walk on the San Pascual walkway. In 1903, El Hogar was constructed at the intersection of Bandini and San Pascual. Next, please. A couple of generations lived here at El Hogar, which is beautiful. And you can see how the influences of the wood and the stone of the area and the rugs and even the bear rug are all very much a part of what the family was enjoying. It's where the young Bandinis made music and read with the family. And if you look over in the divide between the two rooms, if we had a clearer image, you would see the Virgen de Guadalupe is there, which when you think about a Green and Green Brothers craftsman sort of style house, you don't automatically think about the Virgen de Guadalupe hanging out there. So the house remained for some time, even after there'd been a fire in the premises. And this is where it reconnects with Caltech. And that is, it had a unique connection to the Division of Biology at Caltech, for it was the residence of two Nobel laureates. And quoting from Engineering and Science, November 1958, Dr. George W. Beadle lives with his wife and 15-year-old son in the early California style ranch house that used to belong to T.H. Morgan, Dr. T.H. Morgan, and which is located directly across from Dr. Beadle's office on campus. It was demolished in 1962 for a parking lot. And part of next slide, please, I wanted to end with this, is that's one of those ways that history is delicate. What they were sharing there was totally pertinent, but when they started referring to it only as an early California style house, we lost the connection with the Green and Green brothers, with all of the craftsmen and prairie house sort of that were built in the area, and with all of the Latino history that was connected with that house, with that place on Caltech campus. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But the burning question I have right now, and there are questions in the room, is what was the impetus for you to write this book? Why is it so important?
Why is it so important? Oh my goodness. That's a whole separate thing, but I will go quickly. I grew up in East LA. I was there during the walkouts. I identify at one level definitely as a Chicana. So, and my mother was a historian, storyteller from our family. So history and story, and knowing that when things are built, there's somebody who builds them. There's somebody who has a vision. There's somebody who's doing the math, and there's somebody who's actually doing their hands. I know that there are stories out there. I lived for 15 years out here, and I had no idea Latinos had ever been here because there was nothing that noted that about them. Saying that you have Spanish architecture began to acknowledge the influence and translation of a style, but that isn't knowing these people that we saw in dresses, or that family that was there picking walnuts, working hard, that are reminded me very much of the families that I know that are in the Central Valley that still migrate, that still are living there, whose stories aren't told. And I bumped into some elders, got to know them better. And among the things that happened, we started the Latino Heritage Parade. And I ended up doing exhibits. And when I would do an exhibit, invariably, there would be somebody who would come by, they would look, they would appreciate, and then they'd go. And then maybe an hour or another day, they would come by with a tia or a tío or a cousin. If they were a younger person, they wanted to show that this history had existed. We had been here. And if they were bringing their elder, the elder had a chance to be acknowledged. Their life, their experience, good and bad, was up there for them to recognize and be reaffirmed.
Oh my goodness. Let me read a couple of comments that touched upon what you said earlier. So Walter was talking about Roberto. He just wanted to say Roberto was honorably discharged from the U.S. Army in 1946. And then another comment I have here is from Yolanda Rodriguez. She says, my mother's family has been in the LA area since it was Mexico. So she says she's glad that there's a recording so she can get the first words of this. She missed the first part. Now I do have a question from Anonymous. It says, did you get a lot of this information from the census records?
Well, it's one of those things. Census records is one of the tools that I use. The Pasadena Museum of History has Thurston's directories, which will let you know who was here, when, what sort of work they did. So it was one of the tools. And then speaking with elders, having the benefit of, once you're kind of identify as a scholar or being a reader at the Huntington Library, being able to go in and to actually get into archives. One of the exciting things that happened along that line was, because I have this interest in Bandini and the Elliott family, there were pictures that I discovered in the Elliott archives that hadn't been cataloged yet. And in fact, there is a large file, I guess, almost file drawer size of materials of Ralph Bandini that's there, that it's, to my knowledge, still to be cataloged.
John S. Echeveste, our friend John,
Yes.
says, hi, John. Welcome from La Plaza de Cultura.
Yay.
Yes, very informative. Are there any other relics left from that early era?
Oof. They're here and there and sort of scattered. What I tried to do is to try to find a lot of things for the book that are Pasadena specific. So as an example, if you go to Duarte, there is a museum there. One of the daughters of Doña Eulalia married first a Rubio and then a Duarte, and there are some things in a small museum there. You can go to certainly the Pasadena Museum of History, and they have archives that are available to the public. Going to the Huntington and going to some of these other places, there's a process that you have to go through, you have to apply to go through, but the US Census is online. Many of these directories are online. There are maps of the city there that are online. And even though this talk is specific to Latinas and Latinos, there's a Japantown map, I think is what it's called. And you can see where the Japanese businesses in the 40s were here in Pasadena. There's also the Ethnic History Research Project that was done by Carson Anderson for the city of Pasadena. They were looking at sites that existed that were connected or affiliated with some of the groups that I mentioned when I went through that long list for Mesa Alta Rancho. And there's information in there for African American, Japanese American, all of those other groups that I mentioned. There's also a wonderful book by, I want to say it's Delilah Beardsley, that is focused on the African Americans in California. Part of what she did was going up and down sort of California and getting some of the stories of many of the people who were exceptional leaders within what we would now think of as the Black community, the African American community.
My goodness, wonderful. A couple of more comments, and then I have some questions for you. There's a comment here from Yolanda Rodriguez. There is a street in Vernon named Bandini. Do you know how that came about?
I don't. And
Okay.
I've never had the opportunity to go, and I know the history of Bandini is the first name in, and
Right.
then, right? But I don't know that there's an affiliation with the Bandini that was here. But Bandini, Juan Bandini, Arturo's dad, owned huge amounts of land. Between Juan Bandini and his sister married Abel Stearns, between those two men, they owned land from Baja California
Right.
all the way up into above Santa Barbara at various times.
Got you. We got some people here who want to ask a question, so let me liven his mic. There you go. Michael Alexander.
Hi there. Well, I was just going to add a question here. Do you know why Cinco de Mayo is more of a California holiday than it is a Mexican holiday? El Grito in Mexico is obviously the big Mexican independence holiday, but here, for years when I was a kid, we didn't even know about El Grito, but we certainly knew about Cinco de Mayo. Right,
that had to do with people that were here. There's a great book by David Hayes Bautista that could really give you the details, but kind of the little chapter lead is that essentially there were many that were here in what we now think of as Southern California, that did not want to have slavery in the area. And their slavery, they were looking to push slavery in this general area from the eastern kind of Western expansion efforts. And they were partially celebrating what was going on at Puebla with the Cinco de Mayo, with the success that went on there. So I think David's book would give you more detail about that. That's not an area that I really focus on.
Yeah. And just for distinction, El Grito, which Michael referred to, is actually Mexican Independence Day in September. I think it's the 14th. Is that correct?
15th. It's the evening of the 15th going through the 16th.
Got you. And then Cinco de Mayo was La Batalla de Puebla, when I guess the Mexicans were independentized from the French, I think.
Well, it had to do with a battle, and rather than go on that kind of long range, but why it's more celebrated here, I think is best explained by David.
Perfect. So we'll leave that note there. So I have we have a few minutes left, and if you have questions, please post them. Oh, look, here we go. We just got a question here. Says, where can we find the Spanish version of Abuela Pérez de Guillén de Marín, Una Vieja y sus Recuerdos?
You can find it online. I think if you just even enter in Eulalia Pérez Guillén de Marín, and then Una Vieja y sus Recuerdos, you can find that. And you can find it in hard copy too. There is, oh man, I don't remember. There are a couple of small published books that have both the English and the Spanish translation of her Recuerdos. Interesting story about Thomas Savage, who is a person who interviewed her, and that was that he had spent some time in Cuba, and that was where he picked up Spanish. I want to say it was Cuba. He was in Cuba, and he was fluent, and so that was why he was able to have a hearty conversation with her, because she was over 100 years. She lived to be about 112 years, and so she might have been maybe 109, 110 when he interviewed her.
Goodness. So we're almost done here. We have enough time for two more questions. So this next question, Roberta, is from Viviana Esparza. And she says, with the history of Arroyo Seco settlements there and the Latino displacement, and the Latino displacement part of Pasadena history, I guess she's asking if the history of the Arroyo Seco settlements there and the Latino displacement part of Pasadena history.
I would say that when people are displaced, they certainly are part of history. And I think the sort of the thought that I have that comes from the question is, how do we get this history more broadly shared? I mean, I'm very proud of the work that I've done, and I'm feeling very fortunate to share that information with you. But where is it in the schools? Our children should know about the history of the communities that have been here. All of the communities that have been here. But in particular, I know that we have access to information for the Latino community. Our children should know where they are living, who lived here before, how did this city come to be as it is now? I mean, we're all healthier citizens in a way for knowing the history of where we live, wherever we live.
This is such a perfect segue for my last question, Roberta, which is, how can we be intentional then about honoring Latino heritage in Pasadena?
Where is some of this information housed? You know, where are the oral histories of the people that were community members, the people that laid the cement for the civic center, for City Hall, the people who taught, like Ms. Lightfoot, that were involved with PUSD, Stephen Reyes, who was part of the Mexican settlement. Where is there some collection or some place to put their stories? How do we have more than, I think there's a bench named for Copa in the east side of town at the Viña Vieja section of the park, perhaps. That and a bust of Canto Robledo inside Villa Park are really about the only two places that recognize that Latinos have been here. Even the stone, the commemorative stone that is at the CEC for Pasadena City College, It acknowledges the School of Chihuahuita, but it doesn't include Fremont, which is where a lot of kids were. How cool would it be to have Chihuahuita Extension Center instead of the Community Extension Center or the Foothill Extension Center, to recognize the community that was here before? Plaques would be nice.
Yeah, Roberta, I can't thank you enough for this short time that we spent together. And I want to thank all of you that tuned in today. You probably saw from the slides that were rotating, her book is currently available at Mercadito Monarca here in Pasadena. And again, muchísimas gracias. Thank you to all of you that are tuning in today. Before we all leave, I'm going to hand this back to Michael Alexander, our program director of over here at public programming at Caltech. So once again, Roberta, muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias to all of you that tuned in. And take it away, Michael.
Well, thank you very, very much to Raul Espinoza and to Roberta H. Martínez for leading us through a most interesting conversation and opportunity for our audience to engage. And in fact, thank you to all of you who got involved in this program tonight with us as well. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, the Friends of Beckman Auditorium and the Caltech Employees Federal Credit Union. Their support is invaluable to us, and you can find out more about our programs, about becoming a donor, by going to events.caltech.edu. We've got more programs in the works, and I look forward to seeing you when we present them again, either in Beckman Auditorium or live. Thank you again, and good evening.